Hi, I'm Stefan, product lead at Avassa. In this video I will illustrate how you can perform local changes on the site while you're disconnected. In the previous video we did show the autonomous features, meaning that while the site is disconnected, applications can restart, they can self-heal, they can migrate from a failing host to another. All of those actions are totally autonomous on the site while disconnected. I'll now continue with assuming that you're a local site administrator, you are disconnected from the central cloud, but you might need to upgrade your application, you might need to change the site configuration. So what I have here is a site that I call demo site. It has one host, and on that host we're running an application Popcorn. Before disconnecting the site, let us inspect the configuration a little bit. So the demo site, if we look at the configuration, and here we can see an important thing that we have not enabled ingress networking on that site. Later on in the demo I will do a local modification there to enable DHCP on the site. So remember that one. Another thing then, if we move back to the application itself, which I'm going to modify later on, here's the application Popcorn that is deployed on the site. It carries a variable x equal to 10, and while disconnected I have a need to modify that thing. So with that, let us go back and disconnect the site. So I'm moving over to the ship and disconnecting that from the network. So here we can see that the site is disconnected. There is no connection from the site to the control tower as indicated here in the control tower user interface. I will now switch myself to running things on the site. So now I'm connected with the Avassa command line subctl at the site. So note well that I've installed it locally. Another thing that is very important is that I've logged in as a local user. Normally when you log into control tower you have a user maybe in the OIDC, but create a local user in control tower, users are replicated to sites, which means that you can log in with that local user. So now I'm at the site. What we can do is to inspect the state and configuration. So here we see that demo site where I'm locally connected, the config and state. For sites, it's very important to understand that the central config in control tower is replicated as configuration to the site. So we have the configuration available as well on the site. So I'm doing the same command but --config. So this is configuration available on the site which I can directly edit. Let's go edit. We're using the edit command in subctl, brings up a default editor. So here I have the configuration, and as an example here we're gonna change the ingress allocation method to DHCP. And we can save that config, and once I've saved it, it will immediately bite at the site. So the site configuration will be saved and changed and DHCP allowed on the site here. That illustrates how straightforward it is to modify site configuration at the site, since site configuration is replicated to the site, being editable directly. And here we see the DHCP. So a couple of minutes later, the connection from the local site to the control tower was re-established. What happens at that time then? So what we can see here on the site, it has a small pen here. That indicates that local modifications has been made on the site. So we now have a discrepancy between the central configuration and the site local configuration. And this works as intended. As long as you don't do any modifications centrally now, the local modification stays. So whatever the site admin did, in this case modified to DHCP, that stays until a decision is made centrally. So you can inspect the site, you can see that from a center perspective, the intended configuration is that the ingress allocation method is disabled. But what is the local config then? So what you can see here, that centrally as an operator, you have the local configuration is available. And as you can see, it was modified to DHCP. So either you stay like this or you go ahead and modify. So maybe a good thing here at this point, okay, also let from a central perspective it be DHCP. So now that was updated and we are in sync again. So we just showed how to modify site configuration while you're disconnected. We will now move over to the next scenario. So remember from the start of the video, we had deployed an application using control tower and deployed that to the site. So now we're disconnected. I am a site admin here locally, and let's start by inspecting the application that I have deployed. So I'm using the command line to show the state of the application running here. So we have all information about the application and its state. And you can maybe remember sort of these are the config snippets of the application. So when it comes to applications, they behave differently in contrast to site configuration, secrets, and users. The latter, they are configuration centrally in the control tower, and the configuration is replicated to the site. However, applications are not replicated config. Why? Well, you configure the applications in the control tower, and then you send an intent to the sites to deploy the applications. And you might have several hosts on the site, and then the edge enforcer takes a decision to where to deploy the application, for example. So applications are a side effect of the local edge enforcer, so they are not a replicated config. So I just did show the state of the application. If I try to do the following, show me config for the application, it will say not found, meaning I have no local configuration that can be modified. So how do I then go about to modify the Popcorn application? To do that, you sort of recreate a local configuration of the same application. In order to do that, for sites that you suspect that you will go offline and need to do local modifications, remember to keep a local repository of the YAMLs for the corresponding applications, which I have here. So what I did save before I was disconnected, I have the Popcorn application YAML file, the same configuration that we did see in Control Tower. So if you check that one, so this is the configuration. What we can do now is just to create the same application locally. And let's do that. So now I created that application locally. And then the next step is to also deploy it locally. So I have a corresponding deployment file as well, so we can see the deployment YAML, so that will deploy that application locally. So do sort of the same thing here. So here you see I created the application configuration locally and I sort of redeployed it locally, meaning I now have a local configuration representation. So if we go back in the command history and check the config for applications Popcorn, I now have actually a config. So we can also, of course, check the state if we would like. So here's the state for that one. So I have now a local configuration. Let's edit the application. So I can use the edit command in subctl, which will pick up an editor and give me the configuration for the application. So let's bump the version and let's pass 42 instead. So there we go. The application is now locally modified. it's passed 42 instead of 10. So I achieved to perform a local application modification on the site while disconnected. So I'm back at the central operations. The site is connected again. So if I now look in the application list here, I can see that the popcorn application has been modified on the site. I click that one. Now in this case it was only one site, but here you would get all the sites and you would see then it on the explicit site demo site it's been locally modified. So I can pick this one and it will pick the configuration from the site. So here I can see that it's actually 42 for a variable on that site. If I however check the central configuration, it says 10. And again, the same principle holds. As long as I don't reconfigure the application here on central in the control tower, the local modifications will stay. Assume I had this deployed to a number of sites and I would like to go and say that all sites should have maybe 11 instead for that. Now all sites will get x equal to 11, including the locally modified. So now the local modification will be overwritten. And the applications are immutable, so I need to bump the version. Now we have restored the state, the central configuration state. And if I go back here and explicitly say that let's roll out version 1.4 to all sites, now everything will get updated. And if I go back here, I will now see that popcorn is pretty soon deployed on that demo site and the locally modified flag goes away. So in summary, that showed how you can deploy applications to site. While sites are disconnected, you can modify the applications. That local modification will stay as long as you're not modifying the same application in control tower and you are connected. You will get notified with small marks that things have been locally modified, and you can see the local config versus the central config. So now for the final example, we will now show a use case where you're disconnected from the control tower, you're local on site, and you have a need to deploy a brand new application. So that follows the same principle roughly as modifying. So of course, first you need to create the application, you need to create the deployment. And here I have a small YAML file for another application, simple one. It's called Viswas, has one service with one container. We need to pause a while here talking about containers. So generally when you deploy applications from the control tower, the image definition here points to a repository somewhere, to GitLab or wherever. But now we're disconnected from the network, we can't refer to a public repository anywhere. So this assumes that you have the container locally available, of course. Second, what I'm skipping over a bit here is that you need to push that to the embedded registry within Edge Enforcer. Remember, Edge Enforcers has an embedded registry, so whenever you deploy centrally, the images are cached locally by that one and also replicated between the hosts. So you have to load that container into the embedded registry in Edge Enforcer. So you can always check available containers here. So here I'm checking the image registry locally, and I can see that I have a kettle popper manager that I've loaded into the register previously, which means that I can actually create the application above. So let me do that. And now the second step, to create the deployment. There we go. Not harder than this. I created the application, I created deployment. What we can do now is that we can check the state of the application. Here we see it's up and running, locally created. So not harder than this. You need to have the container available. You use subctl to create the application and the deployment, and up and running you have an application locally deployed at the site. And now, connection established again. I'm in the central operations team. I'm looking at the application list, and suddenly I have a Visvos application running on one site. I can also see that it's locally modified. So if I click that one, I can see that it's running on the demo site. So that is where it was created, and I can see the local configuration here fetched. So that concludes the demo on offline modifications. I did show you 3 use cases. First, I had a site, I had deployed applications from the control tower to the sites. Then I disconnected one of the sites, namely the demo site. What I could do then from that site is that I first show you that you can modify the site configuration locally without any connection to control tower. The changes will be noticed later when you're connected, and you can reconcile. The same thing with applications. You can modify applications that have been deployed centrally. And the third use case, I did show you that you can create applications locally. Thank you.